Good afternoon. Welcome to Community.
Give me 1 second.
Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to Community Conversations with OCJR. My name is Jacqueline Blocker. Thank you for sharing part of your afternoon with us today. Our topic today is the impact of incarceration. And we have with us family members who have loved ones who have been justice involved. But before I get to our amazing panelists, let me first introduce some of the rest of the OCJR team that is with us today. First, we have Chris Steele, our OCJR chair, and Clint Castleberry, Deputy Director for OCJR, and Elizabeth Mashburn, our office administrator. So let me get on to the topic at hand. Incarceration takes a toll on our families and our communities. And the stories are where the power lies. And all of our panelists today have been brave enough to come forward and share their stories with us about how the incarceration of a loved one has directly impacted their lives. Incarceration doesn't just cause financial disruption, it causes familial disruption, which ultimately causes problems in our communities. So we have these brave women, and this was an unintended consequence to have a panel of all women, but I think that that is reflective within itself. But on our panel today, we have a mother, a sister, 2 daughters, and a niece who have been brave enough to share their stories. And the hope is to erase some of the stigma associated with incarceration and to give other people the courage to come out and share their stories as well. Because like I said, in our stories, there is power. So I'm going to turn it over first to the sibling of an incarcerated, Rachel? Oh, Rachel. We're gonna wait till Rachel comes back with us, and this might be having some technical problems. So how about I start with Shelly? Do you mind going first? Shelly is the mother of a justice involved individual. Thanks, Shelly.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for asking me to participate. And I really want you to help me with time so I don't talk too long, please. Yeah, so both my son and one of my daughters have been incarcerated both in the juvenile justice system. Ironically, I was just sharing before we started, I was able to go pick up my son literally an hour and a half ago from Tulsa County Juvenile Detention Center and bring him home. He's 15. I'm probably gonna get a little emotional, sorry. He is on house arrest until at least July 7th, but he's home. So I've encountered incarceration with my kids during normal times, and that's tough enough. But during COVID, visitation was over the phone only. And so I haven't seen my son or hugged my son or just laid eyes on him in, I think it's about 3.5 weeks. I honestly got a little confused about how long it's been. But, everybody at Tulsa County did their jobs well, and everybody who I talked with was helpful and great. But I guess what is meaningful, I think about what I should have heard 15 years ago when I was really much more naive than I am now, what points would have been helpful for me to hear. And I think that understanding that the criminal justice system, even when it's working really well, even when it's working 100% without anybody dropping balls, still a really bad system. It's just remarkably bad. So my son, and I asked him permission to talk about this today, I adopted my kids via foster care 12 years ago. My kids, both of their biological dads have been in prison for most of their adult lives. we don't have any contact with my son's biological dad. We have a little bit of contact with my daughter's biological dad. My kids have generational trauma as well as individualized trauma. Lots of stuff that I mean, I hope anybody who lives in Oklahoma knows what that means, because we have a lot of it. But my son self-medicates with marijuana. Also, my kids are African American. I should probably mention that. So my son, who's 15, self-medicates with marijuana. And so twice now he's been arrested for being in a car with other brown boys smoking pot. And this last time he also got a charge for distribution because he had, and I'm sorry to laugh, after 12 years I laugh at things that like normal people don't laugh at, so forgive me. He had the $100 in cash I gave him for getting good grades this last semester. He had it in his backpack. And so they're also charging him with distribution. And they've done a civil forfeiture of the $100. And he also has an evading arrest charge because he runs every single time. And he knows intellectually that's a really bad move. We've talked about it since he was about 8 years old, about how to, stay safe, which, there is no magic formula to stay safe. I want to be really clear about that. And he runs every single time. So this last time he's been incarcerated twice. The first time was for 6 weeks. This last time has been, like I said, I think it's about 3.5 weeks, and the case is not resolved. So he may go back in at some point. But I could have bonded him out, and I chose not to because he's safer being incarcerated than he is running from the police. And I didn't have any, kiddos' critical thinking skills are just not developed until they're about 25. The frontal lobe isn't developed. And so I just didn't feel comfortable that he wouldn't do the same thing all over again because he's done it twice and he knows better and it doesn't matter. And so rather than bond him out with no drug and alcohol treatment, no intervention, I opted to leave him in. And I absolutely hate saying that out loud. I wish that Tulsa County could just put him into drug and alcohol counseling, do some court-ordered something, but there are some unintended consequences of rules that are meant to be supportive and helpful. One of those rules, I don't know if it's a policy or a law, frankly, but in juvenile court, they do the least restrictive approach first. And so even though I've begged them to give him court-ordered counseling, court-ordered drug and alcohol treatment, it doesn't happen because they can't until he ramps up to a specific level, and he hasn't hit that level yet. So, we're big believers in therapy in our family, but he refuses to speak to a therapist. And I mean, I can't make him do that. So I kind of need the court system to leverage their power and kind of help me out with that. But so that's our current situation. My daughter was also incarcerated a few years ago. She's 21. That's a whole other thing. Tulsa County didn't quite know what to do with her, and so they came after me and tried to terminate my parental rights, and gave her a plan, gave me a plan, and I hired a good attorney who was able to stretch the process long enough that I didn't lose my parental rights, but they also were not able to make sure that my daughter had any treatment at all while she was there. So she had the plan, but then no part of the plan actually happened. So that's in a nutshell what's happened there. I was talking, and this is what I'll wrap up with. And by the way, I'm very aware that I'm a middle-aged white woman. I should have said that before I got started. And there's a lot I don't know, a lot I don't know. I know my own experience and that's it. So I was having coffee with someone back when we had coffee with people before COVID. And I was talking and she said, Shelley, you're an abolitionist. And I went, well, of course I'm an abolitionist, because in my mind that meant slavery, because I hadn't ever heard that term applied to modern concepts. And I said, you know, I don't understand. Can you help me understand? And she said, there's a movement to abolish prisons and you're an abolitionist. And I went, oh, wow, yes, I am. Because I know there are likely people who need to be separated from society because of their actions, and I get that, but everything good that happens in prison can happen outside of prison. And I mean, that's just the simplest way for me to think about it. The rehabilitation, the treatment, and there's not very much good that does happen in prison. But everything that does can happen outside. And I think separating people from the people who love them is always tragic. And when you take people who've already had tragedy and trauma, and then you say, hey, we're gonna lock you away because you're so bad, you don't get to function in society because you're a piece of shit, forgive my language, especially Mr. Steele, I know how you feel about language. That's not the kind of country I want to live in. And so I vote, and I'm active in politics, and I'm loud. And so I appreciate you inviting me, and I think I've taken my 10 minutes. And I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Shelley, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm not going to get through this without crying, so just going to be prepared for that. Thank you so much for being brave enough to share your story. I want to remind people, encourage our participants to submit your questions through question and answer, and remind everyone that this is being recorded. So if your friends and colleagues cannot watch it, they can go to the OCJR Facebook page and watch the recording later. Callie Watkins, our reentry coordinator, has joined us. I want to make sure that we introduce her. Thank you, Callie, for joining. And Shelley, thank you again. Your viewpoint is so valuable. I'm going to move over to Rachel, the sibling of an incarcerated individual. And Rachel, I'll let you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Holman, and my brother was incarcerated for drugs. One point I want to piggyback on that Shelley said, that they don't offer any type of rehabilitation for these people. I feel like they just throw them in there and assume that everybody who goes is just a bad person and that their life is meaningless. And there's no need for them to be back in society. My brother was serving, I believe, 3 life sentences without parole, 2 life sentences with parole. Sadly to say that I never knew that he had those cases like that until I actually went to the parole hearing, and I felt like I was absolutely gonna pass out. Sorry, once they read those out. Because in my mind, I'm thinking he didn't kill anyone. He didn't hurt anybody. But yet, they felt like his life wasn't worth coming home again because of that. He had 2 small kids that was growing up without a father. And it's hard to explain to the kids or how they feel, because I think they fail to realize that when you're a father or a mother and you're incarcerated, that the kids feel that pain too. Or if they're active in the community or in sports and you only have one parent showing up and they're like, well, where's your father? Where's your father? And you know, kids are so embarrassed about things like this, or they feel ashamed, or they feel like they don't want anybody to know their pain or how they feel about it, but their lives are affected as well. This weighed heavy on my heart the whole time my brother was there. I had lost my mother while he was in there. Couldn't get to him, couldn't see him. He wasn't able to come home, visit the body or anything. Regardless of whether you're willing to pay for it, pay for the security or whatever, they're still not able to do any of that. So they're not able to get any closure, for only with the peace they try to get within their hearts by themselves, not with any family, not with anyone around them. And the thing I found the hardest while he was in there, just speaking with him, and the reason why he was in there for drugs, and not only from him but other people that I have conversations with, is like they have more drugs in prison than they do have out. So what are we doing to help them while they're in there? What are the steps that we're going to take to get them the necessary help, to make sure that they feel like they have a voice or they want to change their lives? Or, I just feel sometimes that we feel like, or I feel like they're thrown in there and it's just like they don't matter. Like it's just one less person on the street that we have to worry about, not taking into consideration how the family is feeling, how the kids are feeling, or any of that. Because while they're in there locked up, we're going through it as well. We feel that pain, that hurt, that emptiness. We have all those emotions. We have so many unanswered questions. So why? I was recently talking to my aunt that was here from Florida, and she began to tell me that Oklahoma had the highest rate of incarcerated women. In my mind, I'm like, wow, how many of those women are moms? How many of those kids get to see their mother? How many of those kids need a hug from their mom? And I just think that it should be steps in place to, I'm not saying that if you do the crime that you shouldn't have to pay for your actions. I'm not saying that at all, because I believe that it does. But I believe that in the state of Oklahoma, sometimes when you've been a people of color, our time given doesn't always fit the crime. And that's sad. That's heartbreaking. I had a friend, son, that was in Louisiana. Son did the same crime that a Caucasian male did. They're around the same age, maybe a year or two apart. Same judge. Her son got 26 years. The other kid got 9 months probation. It happens here in Oklahoma all the time. I just feel like I'm so, sorry. These past 2 weeks have very been emotional for me. I have 2 African-American sons. One is in the NBA, and one is just a regular guy who works. And I fear for them. I fear that if they get caught up in the system, even for a first-time offense, what may happen to them? Like, who's going to be their voice? I have taken my time to do research, try to understand, put myself in position to be a help and be a voice for others. And sometimes it's not easy speaking out because you're fearful of what people may think, or well, her brother was incarcerated, or her brother was serving a life sentence. Yes, but that doesn't make him a bad person. It doesn't make his life less meaningful. Doesn't mean that he can't change his life around, because he's gotten out in February. He's doing outstanding. He's making progress. He's working towards change, not only within himself, but within our community and within the youth. And that's because I won't say that being locked up didn't play a part with that, but I'm saying, but he had to have somebody that was going to believe in him. Somebody that trusted that once he got out, that his life was meaningful. There's somebody that was going to put back into him everything that was torn down within him. And I'm glad I took that charge and took that stand to be able to be that voice for him to be able to come home. Because in my mind, I never thought I was going to see my brother outside of the bars before. And I just don't think that it should stop once the ones we love come out, that we got to be a voice for the other ones as well. That we have to rally together to make a change and be the change that we want to see. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just so emotional because it's just so much going on. And as a mother, sometimes those things just weigh heavy on your heart. It's sad that I told my kids probably a week ago, I said, I know you guys are probably tired of me texting you, calling you, say, hey, are you all right? Hey, are you good? But I told them they would never understand that as a Black mother, never rest when she don't know where her kids are or they're out. Because the slightest things can happen and they could be a statistic. I guess that's all I want to say at this time. Thank you guys for listening, understanding. I just, whatever I can do to be a voice, to be active, to use my voice, my stance, or whatever I can do to help. I'm here to do outreach, whatever we can to make a change in this system, because a change needs to be made.
Rachelle, that was incredibly powerful. You know, I'm a mother too, so these weeks have been rough. Our stories are our power. Thank you for sharing that. And speaking of the children, we have two very strong daughters here of incarcerated. So Kyla, I'm gonna go with you first, okay?
Thank you all for having me. I'm Kyla Crutcher. This is actually my first time publicly speaking out on my father's incarceration. And I got a bit emotional. I didn't expect for me to. So bear with me if I tear up a little bit. I'm 19. I'm a sophomore at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, majoring in political science. My father, Darrell Crutcher, he was incarcerated during the war on drugs back in 2002. I'm not very aware of the length of his sentence, but I know I was just barely one at the time, and I'm sure we're all aware of the ulterior motive of the war on drugs. And if not, in my opinion, in my eyes, I see it as another way to enslave our Black community, because they hate us. you know. I remember my grandparents taking me on trips to see my dad when I turned around 4. And I remember being so excited to see him, not even aware of where I'm going to see him, just excited that I'm able to actually see my dad because I wasn't living with him. I remember being young and my dad telling me that he was in college. That's where he was. That's why he was always away. And, Rachelle brought up the fact of children being embarrassed. I was that. I remember when I actually found out my dad was in jail. I was embarrassed. I didn't understand. Like I didn't think my dad was a bad person because of who he's shown to me, but from his sentence and the fact that he's in jail, the way society displays it as he's a bad person, that's why he's been put away. Unfortunately, my trips to see my dad became less and less the older my grandparents got. And actually, I really think the last time I seen my dad had to been before my Uncle Terrence Crutcher passed away. I'm sure you all have heard about him. He was shot and killed by a police officer here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And, every time I think about that, it hurts me. My dad didn't even get to see his brother before he took his last breath. But I'm very grateful that my family didn't allow the presence of my father to go dormant in my mind. I didn't realize the impact the absence of my father in my life had on me actually until the past 2.5 years I've been in college. But I will say his absence had sparked the interest, my passion in the career path I've chosen, which is to be a criminal defense attorney. I'm sorry. I believe there needs to be more people like me to be a voice who actually cares about the Black people in the community, that will fight for them, because the system, it only, like Shelly said, they put us away, just another person off the street that they don't have to worry about, not thinking about the impact it may have on families. My dad was charged excessively. Like I said, I don't know the exact sentence he is taking, but it was for drug charges. During a period of time, the system was finding a new way to oppress my people. My dad didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve to not have my dad in my life for my entire adolescence up until my adult years. To this day, I'm 19 years old. A high school graduate. I'm in college, going on 17 years without my dad being in my life. And my dad didn't take anyone away from their family, so why was it justifiable for a judge to take him away from his family for so long, for drug charges, when we're legalizing these things today? My dad I haven't been able to share any of my accomplishments, or my milestones that I've reached in life with him. And I remember, always praying that he'll be able to see me walk across the stage. And of course, that prayer doesn't seem like it's been answered, but I'm still chasing degrees. And I remember getting a call from him on my 18th birthday last year. He had told me he made parole, and we're here in 2020. And I really don't know about parole or how any of that works, but I do know that my dad is still not here with me. Sometimes, like, I blame myself for his incarceration, knowing that he was his intent was to make a living for me and my mother, in the world, only for us to just be struggling, you know, only for him to not even be able to see me thrive in the world that he was trying to make a living for me in. I know that if he was able to give me the world, me and my mother the world, he would. My father is a good man. He's always been a good man. And I'm sorry. I really didn't think I was going to be crying.
Please don't apologize. You're doing a fabulous job, sweetheart.
Thank you. I just feel like the fact that they were so okay with taking my dad away from me when we have literal criminals with authority roaming the streets. Like, when will someone acknowledge the unfairness of my father's sentence, and when will someone reunite us before it's too late, before either one of us take our last breath? Life is so short, and I know, like, after 17 years, he still reaches out to me, makes sure that his baby girl is okay, and that just speaks volumes, considering he didn't even get to know me. You know, when there's fathers who are here who are deadbeats by choice, and they could go see their family and they choose not to. But you know, it's reassuring knowing that I know that he loves me, and if he could be here for me for his first, his only, he definitely would. And he continues to remind me that every opportunity he gets, he still calls me weekly, at least tries to, whenever he gets the opportunity, whenever they're not on lockdown. I just really believe like there's other ways to punish those who aren't a violent threat to our community. And tearing families apart isn't the way to do it. I just hope that someone will see the unfairness of his sentence and allow him to be reunited with me, because a little girl needs her dad. It has affected my relationships with others, how I view things. But you know, I'm just gonna grind and go harder for him, because there's others just like him with the same story who didn't get to see his brother before his brother died. Both of his older brothers before they passed away. One who was killed by someone who's in the system, and I can only imagine how much hate he has built up. But he continues to display his faith, you know, and that's so inspiring. Here's a picture, 2 pictures of me, my mom, and my dad. You know, I'm cheesing. And here's another one. I don't really know how old I was in these 2 pictures, but I wish we had some more. That's all I have.
That was amazing, Kyla. Thank you so much for sharing. Probably should have gotten someone else to host today. Thank you. That was amazing for your first time sharing that story, and so brave. And again, this is what our stories are, our power. I'm not going to delay. I'm going to get right over to our other daughter. I'm going to go out of order if you don't mind. Mari, I saw you nodding a lot, and you're also our other daughter and sister-in-law, if I'm not mistaken, of Justice Involved. So I'm going to turn it over to Maury.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Yeah, my name is Maury Turner. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. And yeah, I was doing a lot of nodding because when I hear Shelly's story, when I hear Kyla's story, when I hear Rochelle's story, I see my family, right? And I understand that this, especially in Oklahoma, where 1 in 2 people has been affected by the justice system in some way, shape, or form, I see how thousands of people across this state share stories similar to ours. I grew up, and my dad and my granddad were in and out of prison. Some of my earliest childhood memories were going to see my father and my grandfather, whether that was in in Lawton or in minimum security facilities out in Geometry, Oklahoma, things like that. But my papa was always very present in my childhood. And so there was a point in time, and when I say very present, like my mom made sure that he taught us life lessons and different things like that. And one thing I distinctly remember is that as a child in elementary school, and it was just like never something I really talked about. I don't think it was ever something that folks told me not to talk about. It was just never something we really talked about. And so there was a point in time where my dad was incarcerated in a minimum security facility out in Geometry, and it's right outside of my hometown. And they would bring the folks that were incarcerated there into our town to set up for rodeos, because this is Oklahoma. And so my mom went and picked him up and snuck him back to the house and made him make us clean our rooms. My Baba always said a cluttered room was a cluttered mind, which is why the door to my room is shut right now. And so growing up, all I knew was that this man was my father and I loved him unconditionally and he taught me a lot. But around the last time that he was released, I started spending more time outside the home and hearing things that were being reinforced by my friends and their families, were that my dad, if he was in and out of prison, that he was just an inherently bad person and that he didn't want a life with us. And these were lessons that I took into heart and held them up until I think around I was 19, 20. But also lessons that I had were lessons about community organizing and the power of it from my mother, my grandmother. And so I'd been doing community organizing with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and the Council on American Islamic Relations. And an event that I was helping organize, I got a call from my uncle, and he told me that my father had a bad accident. And he ended up across the street serendipitously from the event that we were hosting. So the next week I got to listen to him and his story, and I realized that my dad, he always wanted to be a teacher. But he grew up in a system with teachers who always told him that he wasn't going to be anything. Teachers that told him that he wasn't going to graduate high school. And it became sort of this self-fulfilling prophecy. And I realized that in listening to the way that my community, the way that my friends and their families weaponize the justice system, I realized that the justice system does a really bang up job of keeping families apart long after they've left from behind the razor wire. And when you incarcerate a parent, you incarcerate a whole family, you incarcerate a community. I think, and then just to kind of to think about, because I only had my father who was incarcerated, but I think about that and also what that looks like from our perspective, from my mother's perspective. That meant I grew up in a single parent household. That meant that my mother works usually 3 jobs. Now she only works 2. That meant that I could count on one hand some weeks how many times I saw my mom. She would work for the state from 8 to 5. She would work overnights at a Dollar General warehouse. And then on the weekends, she would work at Sally's Beauty Supply. And I see what happens and what are also kind of symptoms of a state that is dependent on a prison system that does not help people. I think about the mothers that are in prison and in jail, and I think about how roughly 80% of the mothers that are sitting in jail at any given time are mothers and are sole providers. And roughly 60% of those mothers haven't been convicted of a crime. The only crime that we have people sitting in jail for a lot of the times, especially in our Black and brown communities, is because they were poor, because they are poor and they couldn't afford to spend time with their families before trial. And that is where we also get such a high number of plea deals. 97% of cases are handled via plea bargains. And that's so people can be able to spend time with their families, because when you spend time in jail and in prison, you lose family. you lose housing, you lose education opportunities. And I think about these things a lot. And because while my father is formerly incarcerated, and while my brother-in-law is currently, and I think about how the sentencing differs, right? I think Rochelle talked about this a little bit, but so I have a brother-in-law that's sitting in prison on a 25-year sentence when the only thing he was guilty of was giving someone a ride. When the person who apparently actually committed the offense, I think got 18 months in prison. And so we talk about what sentencing looks like and that racial inequality in the system. And we also talk about sentence enhancements, right? I think that's something that a lot of folks are talking about too. Things that folks didn't have to think about before, as opposed to now that we are in COVID. When Shelley talked about her son being able to come home for house arrest, which is powerful. But there are some folks who don't get to do that. And then you think about how in a time when families are losing funding opportunities because of COVID, jobs are being shut down, but also that means that prisons are shut down. I can't go and visit my friends that are sitting in jail and prison, and those costs of the calls continuously rack up at a time where you're probably not bringing in much funding. At a time where we live in a state where 1 in 3 families has to choose between which basic essentials to provide for their family. When you incarcerate someone that is in a family unit, you not only incarcerate them, you incarcerate their family, their community, and then you make it to where no one can thrive in a system, in an economic system that also wasn't set up for people to not only survive, but thrive. And that's why I devoted my life to working on how to reform Oklahoma's justice system. That's why I went to OSU to become a veterinarian and ended up doing this instead, because that is where my passion and my heart lies. And so I think about my brother-in-law and my dad, and I think about my best friend that's awaiting to be transferred to prison. I think about my sister that's sitting in prison right now, right? The criminal justice system quite honestly rules my life in a way that I never want other children to have to go through what I went through. I never want other families to have to go through what I went through, what my family went through, what my grandmother went through, what my mother went through, what my sister's going through. I think about these things in the work that we do every day and how powerful it is to be able to sit with folks on this call, with folks outside of this call that are continuously doing it. And I understand that for some people, it might be a controversial topic, but I think that the protests that have been happening across the nation and over the past couple of weeks here in Oklahoma, it's not just this is what's happening and this is what we should be paying attention to, but this is a call to action. Folks are letting you know and have been letting you know for years that the justice system is a place for legalized slavery, a place where bigotry and racism flourish, and have been calling for some sort of reform. And we realize that time and time again, that the reform that we're asking for is not being met, right? You can paint the streets, you can do a post on social media, you can say that you're listening to protesters, but until you actually put those things into work, which is why community organizing works so well, because community organizers have been doing the work that our government has single-handedly dropped the ball on since the beginning of time. And so these things are calls to action. And until you listen to community organizers that have been doing this work and actually put those things in place, you can't reform a system that wasn't built to make people, to save people. I think people should actively, and this is my personal opinion, I guess, but I think that we should be taking it serious and be actively working on defunding. In Oklahoma, if you are stopped by the police officer, by law enforcement, we are one of the deadliest places to be stopped by a police officer. And I think we're top 2 in the nation for police-involved killings, where one of the highest places of incarceration in the world. And then on top of that, we talk about drug offenses and we talk about property offenses and how State Question 780 back in 2016 was supposed to alleviate the system of things like that. And we saw where district attorneys circumvented that system and started to upcharge people with possession with intent to distribute. In some districts, we saw 165% increase in possession with intent to distribute cases after State Question 780 was passed. We didn't see an influx of drug dealers. We didn't see an influx of crime. But we saw that when the district attorneys can no longer charge people, when district attorneys are being forced to utilize our drug and mental health courts, they no longer get those fees. So this system was built on the backs of Black and brown people to be able to retain money. And until we can actually grapple with that, understand it, unlearn it, and strive for something better, we need to be doing everything we can to take this $200 million budget and try to push some of that funding back into our public education system. Because we know when our public education system is underfunded is when our prison rates flourish, they skyrocket. So there are so many things that we could be doing in the community to help alleviate criminal justice reform. And I think actively working on holistically what that looks like: district attorney, prosecutorial education and accountability. That looks like working on maybe if we want to shift to community policing, things like that, but understanding that people have been doing this work in communities for years to come, or have been doing it for years and will continue to do it for years to come. And it's time to start listening to them and seeing what that really looks like. I mean, actually putting those things into place. So that's my story. As a product of Oklahoma's criminal justice system, as a product of Oklahoma's public education system, and just happening to be one of the lucky children in my family, that I get to do this work from this end of it and not from behind the razor wire. It's not lost on me, the fact that I get to sit here in the comfort of my own home and do this work, while my siblings, my friends, my family have to sit behind the razor wire and wait for somebody to say, actually, this sentencing is not right. The way we do jury sentencing isn't right. The way we do bail reform isn't right? So I guess that is, it for me. Oh, I think one last point that I want to drive, since we are here, and since it also is Pride Month, I will say that I think the statistic is 1 in 5 transgender women have been incarcerated, state that they have been incarcerated at some point in time in their life. We use our carceral system to hold the folks that we aren't willing to learn how to love and to care for and to provide for. We use our carceral system to house our unhoused population, to provide a place to hold our folks that are suffering from mental health crisis, to hold our folks that are suffering from substance use, rather than actually pumping funds into the systems that are here to help them, to get them the help that they need. And so this is holistic work that takes place in many forms and touches and probably, whether you know it or not, has touched your life in some way, shape, or form. And so I would implore you all to get involved in any way, shape, or form in this work. I know it seems like a lot to take on, but there are always smaller places to start that you can just ramp up to. That's where I started. Yeah, I guess that's it for me.
Maureen, that was so powerful. Thank you. I mean, you just hit upon everything, and thank you so much. I'm going to go to Morgan, but there's been a common theme that's come up, people mentioning the shame and the embarrassment. So I definitely want to get back around to that. But Morgan, please share your story. Thank you so much, Maureen.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'm Morgan Hale. I had an uncle who was incarcerated for I'm just over 23 years due to a nonviolent drug crime. My Uncle Kevin was my mother's brother. Kevin was sentenced in 1996 to life without parole for a nonviolent drug charge. I was 2 in 96, and I grew up visiting prison after prison. My mom was very dedicated to Kevin and to helping him. She was passionate about making him feel like he was still part of the family and making him feel like we hadn't given up on him. So like so many of you have shared, I grew up traveling around this great state, visiting one hellhole after another, and that was just kind of my normal. Kevin was a very big presence in my life. When I was 7 in 2001, my mom was on her way to visit Kevin in Granite, and she was in a one-car accident and was subsequently killed from that. I guess it kind of goes without saying that Kevin's incarceration has had quite a trickle-down effect into my life, and obviously not just my life, but my family members' lives. My grandmother, Kevin's mother, and my mom's mother was also very dedicated to Kevin and continued to push against all odds and tried everything she could think of, anything she could hear that might help Kevin, she was dedicated to doing. And I grew up kind of learning just to be an advocate for Kevin whenever I could. I definitely share the sentiment that when I would talk about my family situation, there was this sense of shame and embarrassment. Something that I don't share often, but I think is important when thinking about the impacts of incarceration on families. After my mom passed away, I was my dad raised me for a short time, who was also in his addiction, and that didn't go well, as you can imagine. He did the best he could, but unfortunately, he had his demons to fight, and so I was then, in the court system, going through guardianship hearings and stuff, and it just all kind of shaped my life. That moment of losing my mom and the fact that she was traveling to see Kevin when it happened, Kevin's incarceration really changed all of our lives, and it shaped us, I think, in ways that I still am just coming to terms with. I think I didn't even realize for years what an impact it had on me and my family. I am very appreciative to Kevin and have no sort of blame for him. I'm so blessed to have him in my life. Kevin was fortunate in 2018 to receive a commutation from Governor Mary Fallin, and he was released after 23 years. That was obviously an incredible day. Last August of 2019, I got to travel to Granite and pick Kevin up and bring him home to my family, and that was a really powerful day for us. The incarceration is still affecting us on a day-to-day basis. Kevin is still facing, almost $200,000 in court fees and fines, which is a major problem in this state. He had to jump through a ton of hoops after being released. There's just a million things that come with his incarceration that we're still dealing with, but obviously we're very thankful and very lucky to have him home at this time with us. Especially my grandma is just ecstatic to feel like a little piece of her family has got to be put back together again. I have been driven since a pretty young age to be an advocate for others, but it wasn't until I was a junior in college that I decided I should probably go to law school and do this for real, so that I could make as much change as I could. So now I am a third-year law student at the University of Tulsa College of Law. I work for Project Commutation. I have been here for a year. It is the greatest thing I've ever done. I advocate for other families to have their loved ones who've been charged with nonviolent drug crimes have the opportunity for them to come home, and it's my favorite thing in the whole world. So although Kevin's incarceration certainly affected me, I feel like I couldn't be any more blessed or fortunate to have the opportunities that I do now. And Kevin really encouraged me to do those things. I was probably 6 years old the first time he told me that I should be a lawyer so that I could get him out of prison one day. And that's what I do now. And I'm very thankful for that. And I'm also very thankful to hear all of your stories today. I know that this is like a really tough topic, and Kyla, I've been telling this story for years and years publicly, and I still have a really hard time not getting emotional. I also have met your father. He's a very kind man. I visited Lawton last summer with my job, and I remember him very vividly because I thought he was so wonderful. So please feel free to get my contact information if you want to just chat about that experience. I'd love to do that. And yeah, thank you for letting me be a part of this. Thank you guys also for shedding some light on, the ways that you guys are being advocates for others. I often feel like I'm not doing enough, so it's always good to hear, ways I can grow and be better. And I just want to thank you guys for the opportunity.
Wow. You all are, I've said it over and over again, you all are incredibly brave. Sharing your story is so hard, but so powerful. You're sharing your story today is going to give someone else the courage to share their story. It's going to erase the stigma that is associated with it. I'm going to give, we have a couple of minutes. So if everyone can maybe take about 30 seconds to say something of hope. I heard this conversation will continue. I dropped my email in the chat. If anyone knows of anyone that wants to share their story, or if you want to share your story, please email me. But everyone wants to go around 30 seconds, say something with hope. There should be no shame. You all are powerful, strong people. And Shelly, I'll start with you. 30 seconds, some hopeful comments. You're muted. You're muted, Shelly. Shelly, you're muted.
Hang on. Sorry. I got focused. So I know you said we're brave to do this. I want to push back a little bit and say, no, this is literally the minimum I can do as a white person living in South Tulsa who grew up around a lot of other white people. And I have remarkable bias. I'm becoming more aware of it. But I hope that people who grew up like I did, and my family was not overt racist. I just grew up around a lot of white people in Yukon, Oklahoma. And so I hope other white people who grew up the way I did will listen to people of color, will recognize their own bias, and will make better decisions. When you know better, you do better.
Perfect. Morgan? You're muted.
Yeah, I did it too. Sorry. I would just like to reiterate the fact that I think that your stories are so important, and I think that there is so much to be said about these types of conversations. I think they're so useful. I do agree that we can all be better, and there's a lot of ways to grow, and I think that us realizing that there's a lot of hope and a lot of good things to come. I also think that there's a lot of incredible things happening with criminal justice reform in Oklahoma right now. That the fight isn't over. We're just getting started, but I think that we should be proud that we're a part of changing the conversation in this state.
Well said. Well said, Morgan. Thank you. Mari, I'm just going in order of you all on my screen. Mari?
I think the just kind of one thing that I want to drive is that I think with hope comes a responsibility to actually make something happen, right? And so I think walking away from this Zoom call with hope means that you will also walk away from this Zoom call with taking action on what criminal justice reform, on what justice system reform really looks like in Oklahoma. And the hope for me is that everybody watching will be able to continue to do this work with us. I saw Sherry in the comments, and she's a wonderful community activist that I've been able to work with, as well as LaShonda. And I think about the longevity of this work, and I see where we are now and how we have come so much further. And I know it feels like a lot right now, but I think criminal justice reform always feels like a lot. And the way we make things happen is to continuously push on a system. And I mean really push on a system. And so that's my little bit of hope, is that we can all continue to do this work together, because there are folks doing work on criminal justice reform, whether that's State Question 805 or working on or attending the city council meetings, figuring out how to divest and reinvest. There's so much work to be done, and I'm excited to be able to do this work with all of you. So.
Thank you so much, Maury. Kyla?
All I have to say is, continue to be advocates, continue to use your voice, as Ms. Jacqueline has been stating, like, your story has volume, and, I feel really relieved being able to share how incarceration has affected my life and those around me today. You matter, you're important, you're kind, and there will be a change as long as you continue to push for it.
Very well said. You can't tell this is the first time you've told your story. You're phenomenal. And Rachel, I'll let you close out with some words of hope for us.
I would just say stay hopeful, stay prayerful, know that change is coming, that things won't always be like this. I'm thankful to be a part, to hear your stories, the people who's working and being advocates. I have to say this, that if it wasn't for the advocates that pushed for my brother, he wouldn't be home today. We paid thousands and thousands of dollars to lawyers and attorneys for nothing to happen, but the advocates was the ones that brought him home. So I'm thankful for that. And just to know that when I lost hope and I thought it was all going over, God showed me favor. So I would just tell you guys to keep the faith, that change is going to come. We'll be able to make a difference, and we'll be able to be the change we want to see and the change we've been needing to see for so many years.
That was perfect way to close it out. Thank you to our participants. Huge, huge thank you to my panelists. The conversation will continue. Again, this will be posted to the OCJR Facebook page. Please tell your friends and colleagues about this. This is worth seeing. The conversation will continue. Share your stories. It's our power. Panelists, you are my favorites. Thank you so much. That's it for today. Please join us next week. We're going to have a faith leader roundtable to discuss the topic about restorative justice. Thank you to our attendees. Thank you again to our panelists. And we'll see you again. Have a great day. Thank you.